In the previous clip, we have implemented the data load logic in this data service. Now let's make this getAll method async so that the UI stays responsive while the data is loading. So I just rename the method to getAllAsync, and instead of returning an IEnumerable of friend, I return a task of IEnumerable of friend. And I need a using for system threading tasks. Instead of calling the toList method, I call toListAsync. That's an extension method from the namespace system data entity. Now the problem is, the method toListAsync returns a task of list and not a task of IEnumerable. So I just change here the return value of our getAllAsync method to task of list. Now the code is good, but the only problem is that our context might be disposed before this async method returns. So we should await this method inside of our using block. And to use the await keyword, we need to mark our getAllAsync method as async. Now let's just copy this signature and let's go to the iFriend data service interface. Let's put the signature also into that interface. So far it looks good. The friend data service is done and we load the data asynchronous. Now let's go to our view model. In the main view model, we are using the getAll method of the friend data service. So here we should call getAllAsync instead of getAll. We should await the call so that we get the friends. And to be able to await the call, we need to make the load method async. So instead of void, the load method should also return a task so that the caller of the load method can await it. And to be explicit, I also rename this one to loadAsync. Now you might remember where we call this method. It's in the loaded event handler of our main window. So let's go to the main window's code behind file. And here we have the loaded event handler. Inside of that event handler, we call loadAsync on our view model and we await that call. So we mark the event handler here also as async. Now we are done and we should be able to run the application. Here we go, the friends pop up. Now with this asynchronous logic, the application window stays responsive while the data is loading. We could test this by storing the results here in a local variable that we return later, and in between we just await the task delay method, and let's delay for 5 seconds. Now let's run the application again. You see there are no friends loaded, but I can still move the window, and after 5 seconds we see the friends are popping up and I can select them. Now let's change this back. Our users should not wait for 5 seconds to get the friends. So far we are done with loading data by using Entity Framework. Now let's wrap up what you have learned in this module before we look at how we can decouple the parts of our application. In this module you have learned how to set up Entity Framework in the Friend Organizer application. We have created the DB-Context subclass called Friend Organizer DB-Context. We have also added a code-first migration to the data access project. We did this by calling the add migration command in the package manager console. You have also learned how to create and seed the database by calling the update database command in the package manager console. We have implemented the seeding in the configuration class for our code-first migrations. On the friend model, we have added constraints with data annotations. For example, we have set the first name property to be a required property and to have a max length of 50. Beside data annotations, you have also learned how to use Entity Framework's Fluent API to create your constraints. With the created database and the implemented DB-Context class in the data access project, we were able to load data asynchronously in the friend data service. Now our Friend Organizer application is connected to the database. Throughout this course, you will see more code-first migrations because we will extend the model. Now let's continue with the UI. Let's see how we can split up the parts of the main window and the main view model into separate smaller pieces. Welcome to the module Decoupling the UI Parts. My name is Thomas Claudius Huber, and in this module we will split up the Friend Organizer application into separate components. When you look at the current UI structure, you can see that we have a kind of navigation on the left side and a kind of detail view on the right side. but everything is coded directly into the main window and into a single main view model. When the application grows, it will be hard to maintain it if we don't split it up into separate components. And that's exactly what we do in this module. We will create a user control for the navigation and a user control for the details. We will also take care that the navigation does not load the full friend objects. Instead, it should just load the ID and the name of a friend. When a friend is selected in the navigation, the full friend object should be loaded by the detail control. So far to the idea. Now let's look at the module outline. We start this module by planning the new structure of our friend organizer application. Then we will create a lookup data service that returns lookup items. The lookup item will be a simple class that has an ID property and a display member property. We will use this lookup data service to load only the IDs and names for the friends from the database. When we have this lookup data service, we will create a navigation view, which is a user control, and a corresponding navigation view model. The navigation view model will use the lookup data service to load the lightweight friends objects in form of lookup items. After we have the navigation, we will create a friend detail view to display the details and also a corresponding friend detail view model. Now you will learn how these different parts are related to each other when we plan the new structure of the friend organizer application. So far, the friend organizer application has a single main window and a single main view model. The main view model contains the properties friends and selected friend. A selected friend has again different properties, like for example first name. In the main window, we have a list view, and its item source property binds to the friends property and the selected item property binds to the selected friend property. We have also text boxes that are bound to the specific properties of the selected friend. Now this approach is quite okay for a small application, but when the application grows, it will get hard to maintain it. That's the main reason why we split it up into separate components. So we will remove the parts that you see here in the main window and in the main view model, and we will put them into the specific components. On the main view model, we will create a navigation view model property that exposes a navigation view model. In the main window, we will use the navigation view, which is a user control that we will create, and we will bind its data context property to the navigation view model property of the main view model. For the details, we will do exactly the same. We will create a friend detail view model property in the main view model, and we will have a friend detail view that is bound to the friend detail view model property. When it comes to data loading, the navigation view model will use a lookup data service to load the friends. As mentioned in the previous clip, this lookup data service will return lightweight objects that have just an ID and a display member property. The friend detail view model will use the friend data service. We have that data service already, but we need to adjust it. Currently it has a getAllAsync method to load all the friends. But the friend detail view model requires just a single friend that has to be loaded by ID. That means we have also some work to do in the friend data service. Now let's start and let's implement this new structure in the friend organizer application. In this demonstration, we will start by creating a lookup data service. Then we will create the navigation view model that is using that lookup data service, and we will also create the navigation view. When we are done with the navigation, we will create the friend detail view model and the friend detail view. Let's switch to Visual Studio and let's start with the lookup data service. The lookup data service that we will create will return lookup items. So we need to create that lookup item class. Let's right-click on the model project and let's say add class, and let's name the class lookup item. Let's make this class public and let's add a property of type int that has the name ID, and let's add another property of type string that we call display member. Let me also remove these unused usings. I placed this lookup item class in the model project because theoretically I could load these lookup items from a view in the database. But instead of having such a view, we will do the select in our lookup data service that we will create in the UI project in this data folder. So let's right click here and let's add a new class and let's call it lookup data service. I make this class public and I add a constructor that takes a func parameter that returns a friend organizer DB context. I call the parameter context creator, and I just store the value in a field. Now let's add a method to load the friend lookup. So I create here a public method that returns a task of IEnumerable of lookup items. And we need a using for friend organizer model. I name the method getFriendLookupAsync. Now inside of this method we add a using block and we create a DB context by calling our context creator func. Now we can create a select to return the lookup items for the friends. So let's use the context and let's grab the friends DB set. We don't want the items to be tracked by the context, and we call the select method. We want to select a friend into a new lookup item. And so on the lookup item, we set the ID to the friend's ID, and we set the display member property to the friend's first name plus a space plus the friend's last name. Now after we have selected a lookup item for each friend, I call the toListAsync method. And as this is an extension method, I need to add a using for system data entity. Now we can just return this list with the lookup items by using the await keyword here. So we need to make our method here async. Now we are done with the getFriendLookupAsync method. Let's scroll up to our class definition and let's press Ctrl dot behind the class to extract an interface. I want the interface to be named iFriendLookupDataService and it should contain the method getFriendLookupAsync. Okay, let's create this interface. Now let's go to the Bootstrapper in the startup folder to register the lookup data service for the interface iFriendLookupDataService. So here where we have the friend data service, I call builder register type and I want to register the lookup data service. I want to register it as an iFriendLookupDataService. But wait, in the future we will add more lookups to that lookup data service. So I don't want to register it for this single interface. Instead of registering the lookup data service for just this interface, I can also call the method as implemented interfaces. Now a lookup data service instance will be injected by AutoFag for the interfaces that are implemented by the lookup data service class. With the lookup data service in place, we can now continue by building the navigation view model.